and welcome to the Page Turners again with Miss Beth here at Pueblo West Library. We took a little break last week because of the holiday and we weren't open, but if you can remember back to the week before when we were reading some more of James and the Giant Peach, maybe you remember that James had met his special insect friends inside the Giant Peach, and they were just now getting ready to go to bed on the very first night that he's there. So let me show you his friends again. So you have grasshopper and centipede and spider and ladybug and earthworm. So he has all these friends that he just met and pretty magical creatures. So let's see what happens. Let's get started right away. Chapter 13. So we're starting with Miss Spider, who is right here. A few minutes later, Miss Spider had made the first bed. It was hanging from the ceiling, suspended by a rope of threads at either end, so that actually it looked more like a hammock than a bed. But it was a magnificent affair, and the stuff that it was made of shimmered like silk in the pale light. I do hope you'll find it comfortable, Miss Spider said to the old green grasshopper. I made it as soft and silky as I possibly could. I spun it with gossamer. That's a much better quality thread than the one I used for my own web. Thank you so much, my dear lady, the old green grasshopper said, climbing into the hammock. And this is just what I needed. Good night, everybody. Good night. Then Miss Spider spun the next hammock, and the ladybug got in. After that, she spun a long one for the centipede and an even longer one for the earthworm. And how do you like your bed? She said to James when it came to his turn. Hard or soft? I like it very soft, thank you very much, James answered. For goodness sake, stop staring around the room and get on with my boots, the centipede said. You and I are never going to get any sleep at this rate. And kindly line them up neatly in pairs as you take them off. Don't just throw them over your shoulder. James worked away frantically on the centipede's boots. Each one had laces that had to be untied and loosened before it could be pulled off. And to make matters worse, all the laces were tied up in the most complicated knots that had to be picked with fingernails. It was just awful. And it took about 2 hours. Wow, that's a long time to take off shoes. And by the time James had pulled off the last boot of all and had lined them up in a row on the floor, 21 pairs in all, the centipede was fast asleep. Wake up, centipede, whispered James, giving him a gentle dig in the stomach. It's time for bed. Thank you, my dear child, the centipede said, opening his eyes. Then he got down off the sofa and ambled across the room and crawled into his hammock. So ambled is kind of just walking slowly back and forth, not too energetic. James got into his own hammock, and oh, how soft and comfortable it was compared with the hard, bare boards that his aunts had always made him sleep upon at home. Lights out, said the centipede drowsily. Nothing happened. Turn out that light, he called, raising his voice. James glanced around the room, wondering which of the others he might be talking to, but they were all asleep. The old green grasshopper was snoring loudly through his nose. The ladybug was making whistling noises as she breathed. And the earthworm was coiled up like a spring at one end of his hammock, wheezing and blowing through his open mouth. As for Miss Spider, she had made a lovely web for herself across one corner of the room, and James could see her crouching right in the very center of it, mumbling softly in her dreams. I said, turn out the light, shouted the centipede angrily. Are you talking to me? James asked him. Of course I'm not talking to you, the centipede answered. That crazy glowworm has gone to sleep with her light on. For the first time since entering the room, James glanced up at the ceiling. And there he saw a most extraordinary sight. Something that looked like a gigantic fly without wings. It was at least 3 feet long, was standing upside down upon its 6 legs in the middle of the ceiling, and the tail end of this creature seemed to be literally on fire. A brilliant greenish light, as bright as the brightest electric bulb, was shining out of its tail and lighting up the whole room. "Is that a glowworm?" asked James, staring at the light. "It doesn't look like a worm of any sort to me." "Of course it's a glowworm," the centipede answered. "At least that's what she calls herself. Although actually you're quite right. She isn't really a worm at all. Glowworms are never worms. They're simply lady fireflies without wings. Wake up, you lazy beast!" But the glowworm didn't stir, so the centipede reached out of his hammock and picked up one of his boots from the floor. "Put out that wretched light!" he shouted, hurling the boot up at the ceiling. The glowworm slowly opened one eye and stared at the centipede. "There's no need to be rude," she said coldly. "All in good time." Come on, shouted the centipede, "or I'll put it out for you." So here you can see the centipede and the glowworm up at the top of the page in James. So that is where they're getting their light from, the glowworm hanging from the ceiling way up top. "Oh, hello, James," the glowworm said, looking down and giving James a little wave and a smile. "I didn't see you come in." "Welcome, my dear boy, welcome, and good night." Then, click, and out went the light. James Henry Trotter lay there in the darkness with his eyes wide open, listening to the strange sleeping noises that the creatures were making all around him, and wondering what on earth was going to happen to him in the morning. Already he was beginning to like his new friends very much. They were not nearly as terrible as they looked. In fact, they weren't really terrible at all. They seemed extremely kind and helpful in spite of all the shouting and arguing that went on between them. "Good night, old green grasshopper," he whispered. "Good night, ladybug. Good night, Miss Spider." But before he could go through them all, he had fallen fast asleep. Chapter 14. "We're off!" someone was shouting. "We're off at last!" James woke up with a jump and looked about him. The creatures were all out of their hammocks and moving excitedly around the room. Suddenly the floor gave a great heave, as though an earthquake were taking place. "Here we go!" shouted the old green grasshopper, hopping up and down with excitement. "Hold on tight!" "What's happening?" cried James, leaping out of his hammock. "What's going on?" The ladybug, who was obviously a kind and gentle creature, came over and stood beside him. "In case you don't know it," she said, "we are about to depart forever from the top of this ghastly hill that we've all been living on for so long. We are about to roll away inside this great, big, beautiful peach to a land of what?" asked James. "Never you mind," said the ladybug, "but nothing could be worse than this desolate hilltop and those 2 repulsive ants of yours." So repulsive is another word for just dreadful and horrible and terrible. So clearly the ladybug doesn't know exactly what's in store, but she's very hopeful that it's going to be something great. "Hear, hear!" they all shouted. "Hear, hear!" "You may not have noticed it," the ladybug went on, "but the whole garden, even before it reaches the steep edge of the hill, happens to be on a steep slope. And therefore the only thing that has been stopping this peach from rolling away right from the beginning is the thick stem attaching it to the tree. break the stem, and off we go. There's our ladybug right there. She does look kind and gentle, doesn't she? Watch it, cried Miss Spider at the room, as the room gave another violent lurch. Here we go. Not quite, not quite. At this moment, continued the ladybug, our centipede, who has a pair of jaws as sharp as razors, is up there on top of the peach, nibbling away at the stem. In fact, he must be nearly through it, as you can tell from the way we're lurching about. Would you like me to take you under my wings so that you won't fall over when we're rolling? That's very kind of you, said James, but I think I'll be all right. Just then, the centipede stuck his grinning face through a hole in the ceiling and shouted, I've done it! We're off! We're off, the others cried. We're off! The journey begins, shouted the centipede. And who knows where it will end, muttered the earthworm. If you have anything to do with it, it can only mean trouble. Nonsense, said the ladybug. We are now about to visit the most marvelous places and see the most wonderful things. Isn't that so, centipede? There's no knowing what we'll see, cried the centipede. Oh, it looks like they're going to sing a little song here. We may see a creature with 49 heads who lives in the desolate snow, and whenever he catches a cold, which he dreads, he has 49 noses to blow. We may see the venomous pink-spotted scrunch who can chew up a man with one bite. It likes to eat 5 of them roasted for lunch and 18 for supper at night. We may see a dragon and nobody knows that we won't see a unicorn there. We may see a terrible monster with toes growing out of the tufts of its hair. We may see the sweet little bitty bright hen, so playful, so kind and well-bred. And such beautiful eggs, you just boil them and then they'll explode and they blow off your head. A new and a rhinoceros surely you'll see, and that enormous and gnarled gnat, whose sting when it stings you goes in at the knee and comes out through the top of your hat. We may even get lost and be frozen by frost. We may die in an earthquake or a tremor. Or nastier still, we may even be tossed in the horns of a furious dilemma. But who cares? Let us go from this horrible hill. Let us roll, let us bowl, let us plunge. Let's go rolling and bowling and spinning until we're away from old Spiker and Sponge. 1 second later, slowly, insidiously, oh, most gently, the great peach started to lean forward and steal into motion. The whole room began to tilt over, and all the furniture went sliding across the floor and crashed against the far wall. So did James and Ladybug and the old green grasshopper and Miss Spider and the earthworm and also the centipede, who had just come slithering quickly down the wall. Outside in the garden at that very moment, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker had just taken their places at the front gate, each with a bunch of tickets in her hand, and the first stream of early morning sightseers was visible in the distance, climbing up the hill to view the peach. As you can remember from earlier in our story, when the peach got super big, Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge decided to set up a little carnival around it and charge people to come see it. So that's what they're doing right now. They're lining up the people who came early in the morning to come see the giant peach, but they're in for a surprise. We shall make a fortune today, Aunt Spiker was saying. Just look at all those people. I wonder what became of that horrid little boy of ours last night, Aunt Sponge said. He never did come back in, did he? He probably fell down in the dark and broke his leg, Aunt Spiker said. Or his neck, Aunt Sponge said hopefully. Just wait till I get my hands on him, Aunt Spiker said, waving her cane. He'll never want to stay out all night again by the time I've finished with him. Good gracious me, what's that awful noise? Both women swung around to look. The noise, of course, had been caused by the giant peach crashing through the fence that surrounded it, and now gathering speed every second it came rolling across the garden toward the place where Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker were standing. They gaped and they screamed, and they started to run. They panicked. They both got in each other's way. They began pushing and jostling, and each of them was thinking only about saving themselves. Aunt Sponge, the fat one, tripped over a box that she'd brought along to keep the money in and fell flat on her face. Aunt Spiker immediately tripped over Aunt Sponge and came down on top of her. They both lay on the ground, fighting and clawing and yelling and struggling frantically to get up again. But before they could do this, the mighty peach was upon them. There was a crunch, and then there was silence. The peach rolled on, and behind it, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker lay ironed out upon the grass as flat and thin and lifeless as a couple of paper dolls cut out of a picture book. Oh my, that was intense. Let's see what happens next in chapter 16. And now the peach had broken out of the garden and was over the edge of the hill, rolling and bouncing down the steep slope at a terrific pace. Faster and faster and faster it went, and the crowds of people who were climbing up the hill suddenly caught sight of this terrible monster plunging down upon them, and they screamed and scattered to right and left as it went hurtling by. At the bottom of the hill, it charged across the road, knocking over a telephone pole and flattening two parked automobiles as it went by. Then it rushed madly across about 20 fields, breaking down all the fences and hedges in its path. It went right through the middle of a herd of fine Jersey cows, and then through a flock of sheep, and then through a paddock full of horses, and through a yard full of pigs. And soon the whole countryside was a seething mass of panic-stricken animals stampeding in all directions. The peach was still going at a tremendous speed with no sign of slowing down. And about a mile further on, it came to a village. Down the main street of the village it rolled, with people leaping frantically out of its path left and right. And at the end of the street, it went crashing right through the wall of an enormous building out the other side, leaving two gaping round holes in the brickwork. This building happened to be a famous factory where they made chocolate. And almost at once, a great river of warm, melted chocolate came pouring out of the holes in the factory wall. A minute later, this brown, sticky mess was flowing through every street in the village, oozing under the doors of houses and into people's shops and gardens. Children were wading in it up to their knees, and some were even trying to swim in it. And all of them were sucking it into their mouths in great, greedy gulps and shrieking with joy. But the peach rushed on across the countryside. Here's a picture of our chocolate factory, with the melted chocolate just oozing everywhere. On and on and on the peach went, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Cow sheds and stables, pigsties and barns, bungalows, hayricks. Anything that got in its way went toppling over like a 9-pin. Which, if you don't know, is like the pins that are used in bowling. So a bowling pin. An old man sitting quietly beside a stream had his fishing rod whisked out of his hands as it went dashing by, and a woman called Daisy Entwistle was standing so close to it as it passed that she had the skin taken off the tip of her long nose. Would it ever stop? Why should it? A round object will always keep on rolling as long as it is on a downhill slope. And in this case, the land sloped downhill all the way until it reached the ocean. The same ocean that James had begged his aunts to be allowed to visit the day before. Well, perhaps he was going to visit it now. The peach was rushing closer and closer to it every second, and closer also to the towering white cliffs that came first. These cliffs are the most famous in the whole of England, and they are hundreds of feet high. Below them, the sea is deep and cold and hungry. Many ships have been swallowed up and lost forever on this part of the coast, and all the men who were in them as well. The peach was now only 100 yards away from the cliff. Now 50, now 20, now 10, now 5. And when it reached the edge of the cliff, it seemed to leap up in the sky and hang there suspended for a few seconds, still turning over and over and over in the air. And then it began to fall down, 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 down. Smack! It hit the water with a colossal splash and sank like a stone. But a few seconds later, up it came again, and this time up it stayed, floating serenely on the surface of the water. Wow, that was pretty intense too. So the peach flew off the end of the cliff and smacked into the water. For a second, they thought it was going to go all the way to the bottom. But just like a floaty toy in the pool, it floated up to the top, and there it is, resting peacefully. So chapter 17, let's see what happens now. At this moment, the scene inside the peach itself was one of indescribable chaos. James Henry Trotter was lying bruised and battered on the floor of the room amongst a tangled mess of centipede and earthworm and spider and ladybug and glowworm and old green grasshopper. In the whole history of the world, no travelers had ever had a more terrible journey than these unfortunate creatures. It had started out well with much laughing and shouting. As you can imagine, they're rolling down the hill really fast. That might be a little bit fun, huh? And for the first few seconds, as the peach had begun to roll slowly forward, nobody had minded being tumbled about a bit. And when it went bump, and the centipede had shouted, "That was Aunt Sponge," and then bump again, and "That was Aunt Spiker," there had been a tremendous burst of cheering all around. But as soon as the peach rolled out of the garden and began to go down the steep hill, rushing and plunging and bounding madly downward, then the whole thing became a nightmare. James found himself being flung up against the ceiling, then back onto the floor, boom, then sideways against the wall, and then up onto the ceiling again, up and down and back and forth and round and round. And at the same time, all the other creatures were flying through the air in every direction. And so were the chairs and the sofa, not to mention the 42 boots belonging to the centipede. Everything and all of them were being rattled around like peas inside an enormous rattle that was being rattled by a mad giant who refused to stop. To make it worse, something went wrong with the glowworm's lighting system, and the room was in pitchy darkness. There were screams and yells and curses and cries of pain, and everything kept going round and round. And once James made a frantic grab of some thick bars sticking out from the wall, only to find that they were a couple of the centipede's legs. "Let go!" shouted the centipede, kicking himself free, and James was promptly flung across the room into the old green grasshopper's horny lap. Twice he got tangled up in Miss Spider's legs, a horrid business. And toward the end, the poor earthworm, who was cracking himself like a whip, every time he flew through the air from one side of the room to the other, coiled himself around James's body in panic and refused to unwind. Oh, it was frantic and terrible. But it was all over now, and the room was suddenly very still and quiet. Everybody was beginning slowly and painfully to disentangle himself from everybody else. You can see Spider and James kind of tangled together. "Let's have some light," shouted the centipede. "Yes," they cried, "light, give us some light." "I'm trying," answered the poor glowworm. I'm doing my best. Please be patient. They all waited in silence. Then a faint greenish light began to glimmer out of the glowworm's tail, and this gradually became stronger and stronger until it was anyway enough to see by. Some great journey, the centipede said, limping across the room. I shall never be the same again, murmured the earthworm. Nor I, said the ladybug. It's taken years off of my life. But, my dear friends, cried the old green grasshopper, trying to be cheerful, we are there. Where? They asked. Where is there? I don't know, the old green grasshopper said, but I'll bet it's somewhere good. We're probably at the bottom of a coal mine, the earthworm said gloomily. We certainly went down and down and down very suddenly at the last moment. I felt it in my stomach and I still feel it. Perhaps we are in the middle of a beautiful country full of songs and music, the old green grasshopper said. Or near the seashore, James said eagerly, with lots of other children down on the sand for me to play with. Pardon me, murmured the ladybug, turning a trifle pale, but am I wrong in thinking that we seem to be bobbing up and down? Bobbing up and down, they cried. What on earth do you mean? You're still giddy from the trip, the old green grasshopper told her. You'll get over it in a minute. Is everybody ready to go upstairs now and take a look around? Yes, yes, they chorused. Come on, let's go. I refuse to show myself out of doors in my bare feet, the centipede said. I have to get my boots on again first. For heaven's sake, let's not go through all that nonsense again, the earthworm said. Let's all lend the centipede a hand and get it over with. The ladybug said, come on. So they did, all except Miss Spider, who set about weaving a long rope ladder that would reach from the floor up to a hole in the ceiling. The old green grasshopper had wisely said that they must not risk going out of the side entrance when they didn't know where they were, but must first of all go up onto the top of the peach and have a look around. So half an hour later, when the rope ladder had been finished and hung, and the 42nd boot had been laced neatly onto the centipede's 42nd foot, they were all ready to go out, amidst mounting excitement and shouts of, here we go, boys, the promised land. I can't wait to see it. The whole company climbed up the ladder, one by one, and disappeared into a dark, soggy tunnel in the ceiling that went steeply, almost vertically upward. And I think that's where we're going to stop for tonight. It sounds like a pretty good stopping place for me, even though it's a little bit suspenseful. I don't know where they are. Do you have a guess? Do you think they're in the middle of a forest or in the middle of a city or maybe in the middle of an ocean? Remember, Miss Ladybug said they were bobbing up and down. She felt like they were bobbing. So who knows where they are? We'll find out next time, next Monday at 6:30. I hope you can join me again for more James and the Giant Peach. Have a good night.